There are 4 verses in Genesis that established theology has tried to conceal for centuries. They describe a forbidden union between celestial beings and human women that altered human destiny. Most read the scriptures without ever questioning the true nature of those mysterious beings. However, the original Hebrew manuscripts reveal a truth much more disturbing than any allegory. Who were those sons of God who left heaven to join with women and beget a cursed lineage? The answer could completely transform our view of the true origin of evil on earth. For centuries, scholars have debated who those beings were and what catastrophic consequences they caused. What you are about to discover is not a myth, but a censored fragment of history that time has hidden. To understand this enigma, we must go back to the dawn of humanity when sky and earth were united. The sacred narrative begins when human beings started to populate and multiply upon the face of the earth. It was at that moment when the sons of God noticed that the daughters of humans were beautiful and utterly desirable. The original Hebrew expression Bnei Elohim indicates a direct and singular creation coming from the divinity itself. In the Old Testament, this term is almost always reserved to designate angels or beings from the celestial realm. This immediately invalidates the modern hypothesis that they were simply virtuous men of the lineage of Seth. The most primitive reading indicates that spiritual entities actively burst into the physical and human world. The Book of Job uses exactly that same word to refer to the angels before the throne of the Eternal. The text then suggests that beings from another dimension violated a fundamental cosmic law to incarnate. This transgression was not a carnal impulse, but a premeditated rebellion against the order of the Creator of the universe. By taking on physical form, those beings abandoned their glorious state to access the forbidden pleasures of matter. The narrative becomes even darker when studying the direct results of those completely unnatural unions. The result of that blend between the divine and the human was not normal creatures, but a powerful and hybrid race. The Genesis refers to them as Nephilim, a term that has been inaccurately translated as giants or demigods. The root of the word Nephilim derives from the Hebrew verb naphil, which literally means to fall, or those who have fallen. They were the fallen, beings who descended violently to subjugate primitive humanity with superhuman power. The Jewish traditions preserved in apocryphal writings offer chilling revelations about these creatures. The Book of Enoch, respected by the early church, develops this story with absolutely terrifying precision. Enoch describes 200 angels called the Watchers who collectively promised to fulfill that forbidden pact. They settled on the summit of Mount Hermon, a precise geographical location that we can still find on current maps. Their leader, Semiyaza, feared that his followers lacked the necessary courage to carry out such a forbidden act. But everyone took human women and transmitted knowledge that humanity was not yet prepared to receive. They were taught the art of warfare, advanced metal forging, dark magic, and the seductive use of forbidden cosmetics. It was a total corruption of knowledge, delivering forbidden technology and magic to a civilization still in its infancy. The Watchers instructed the men in weapon manufacturing, turning agricultural peace into armed conquest. They unveiled the mysteries of the firmament and the astral cycles to predict the future through dark astrology. They shared formulas to transform metals and create poisons that no known remedy could counteract. Women learned to beautify their faces with ointments and dyes to awaken uncontrollable passions in others. That accelerated knowledge, without sufficient moral maturity, turned the land into a perpetually bloodied battlefield. The arrival of the Nephilim ushered in an era of violence and absolute chaos that had never before existed on Earth. Those hybrid creatures possessed brutal strength and a voracious appetite that exhausted all the resources at their disposal. According to moderate ancient Jewish and Aramaic texts, they measured between 3 and 5 meters in height. Their bones of abnormal density allowed them to wield weapons that no ordinary human could even hold. The growth rate of those giants was supernatural, and they reached physical maturity in just a few years. His intellect fused the celestial knowledge inherited from his ancestors with the predatory and fallen human cunning. They founded empires of terror, dominating entire regions and demanding impossible tributes from the subjected populations. When food became scarce, the texts state that they began to feed on defenseless human beings themselves. The land was flooded with blood and lament until divine justice was compelled to intervene definitively. This narrative explains why the flood was not just a moral punishment, but an urgent genetic purge. The human lineage had been irreparably contaminated by the intrusion of DNA completely foreign to our species. The mission of the deluge was to recover the original human genome by erasing all traces of hybridization with the fallen. It was not an arbitrary punishment, but a precise intervention to preserve what little genuine humanity remained. Every creature that breathed outside the ark carried in its blood the genetic poison that had corrupted creation. The waters covered even the highest peaks to prevent any Nephilim from taking refuge in elevated places. Noah was chosen not only for his righteousness, but because he was blameless in his generations. That is, genetically pure. But the theory of fallen angels is not the only interpretation that historians have considered over time. In the Middle Ages, the Church sought to rationalize this myth to eliminate the uncomfortable idea of corporeal angels. The hypothesis of the lineages then emerged, proposing that the sons of God were pious descendants of Seth. According to this version, the daughters of men represented the offspring of the violent and cursed lineage of Cain. Augustine of Hippo was one of the great defenders of this stance, attempting to suppress the supernatural from the narrative. They argued that angels, being pure spirits, lack the biological capacity to unite with human women. However, that theological explanation consciously ignores the specific use of the Hebrew term Bnei Elohim used. If the text intended to say devoted men, it would have used the term Bnei Adam, which means sons of men. The deliberate distinction between sons of God and daughters of men cannot be dismissed without violating the sacred text. Fathers of the early church like Justin Martyr and Irenaeus accepted without hesitation the reading of the fallen angels. It was later, when Greek philosophy permeated theology, that this literal interpretation began to be rejected. Moreover, that theory does not explain how the union of two ordinary human lineages produces offspring of giant proportions. Biology indicates that the union between believer and unbeliever produces a normal child, not a 3-meter-tall colossus. Therefore, the theory of the lineage of Set leaves too many unanswered questions that the text itself cannot explain. There is a third interpretation that links this account to the ancient king lists of the Sumerian civilization. In Mesopotamia, primitive monarchs proclaimed themselves descendants of gods and ruled for impossible periods of time. The wise Sumerians, known as Apkallu, were presented as demigods who introduced human civilization. The similarity between the Watchers in the Book of Enoch and the Apkallu in Mesopotamian mythology is notable. Both groups appear as instructors who transmitted advanced knowledge and mingled with humans. This indicates that Genesis could be a theological controversy against the religious beliefs of neighboring nations. While the Sumerians celebrated these hybrid creatures as heroes, the Bible denounces them as monsters and traitors. Those so-called heroes of antiquity, renowned men, were not virtuous models but tyrants who deserved to perish. Archaeology has found figurines and texts throughout the region that evidence the fascination with divine hybridization. The concept of the God King was the foundation of political power in almost all the great civilizations of antiquity. From the pharaohs of Egypt to the Caesars of Rome, all claimed to carry a divine spark in their noble veins. But Genesis dismantles that claim by demonstrating that such a sacred mixture was an abomination that leads to death. The divine decree against that corruption was to drastically limit human life to 120 years. That reduction in longevity marked the end of the mythical era and the beginning of mortal history as we know it. No beings would exist anymore that lived for nearly 1,000 years, amassing unlimited power and influence over humanity. The mystery grows as the Book of Numbers in the Tanakh states that the Nephilim existed even after the flood. This led researchers to wonder if genetic contamination occurred more than once in history. Some Jewish writings indicate that Og, king of Bashan, was one of the last survivors of that cursed and giant race. The tribes of Canaan, including the Anakim and Rephaim, were considered direct descendants of those hybrid beings. This explains that the conquest of the Promised Land was not just a military campaign, but a total spiritual war. Israel had the mandate to eradicate those contaminated lineages, to purge the land of all corrupt genetic inheritance. This narrative highlights the enduring human temptation to transcend one's circumstances beyond the military aspect. The quest for immortality and absolute power is a thread that connects Eden, Babel, and the Nephilim into a single story. The sons of God offered an evolutionary shortcut, an instant knowledge that promised to elevate man above his mortality. It is the same pattern as Prometheus in Greek mythology, when he stole the sacred fire from the gods to give it to man. Or, in the story of the Titans, divine beings who rose against the Olympic order and were confined to Tartarus. Interestingly, the Bible uses the term Tartarus in the New Testament to refer to the prison of those rebellious angels. The Apostle Peter writes that God did not spare the sinful angels, but chained them in dungeons of darkness. Judas, in his letter, confirms that those angels abandoned their own nature to pursue strange and forbidden flesh. Those references in the New Testament confirm the supernatural interpretation that Second Temple Judaism had. For the first followers of Christ, the existence of hostile spiritual powers was an absolutely real certainty. They believed that the spirits of the Nephilim, being hybrids, could neither ascend to heaven nor descend to hell upon death. According to the tradition of Enoch, those bodiless spirits became the demons that now haunt humanity. They desperately seek physical bodies to possess, trying to recover what they lost when the flood annihilated them. That vision provides a coherent explanation for the origin of demons, distinct from that of the fallen angels themselves. The cultural echo of this story still resonates today in our modern tales about extraterrestrials and fictional superheroes. Numerous ancient astronaut theorists have attempted to reinterpret the sons of God as extraterrestrial beings. Arrive in fiery chariots and beings from the sky, a basic depiction of ships and extraterrestrial technology. That materialistic perspective misses the deep spiritual and ethical aspects found in the whole biblical narrative. The story addresses the breach of sacred boundaries set by the Creator, not cosmic biology. It is a warning about what happens when the boundaries separating the different planes of existence are crossed. The figure of the divine descending to the human plane represents the ultimate perversion of the original order of creation. Instead of man ascending to God through virtue, the divine descends to man, driven by lust. It is an investment of the sacred order, where the spirit becomes flesh, not to redeem, but to corrupt and enslave everything. When examining the original Hebrew, we find nuances that completely disappear in conventional modern translations. The word for humanity in this passage is Ha-Adam, which refers to all of humankind, and not just the lineage of Cain. This reinforces the idea that the crisis was global, affecting the entirety of the biological structure of our species. The divine pain expressed in Genesis in the face of so much evil is the response to seeing his image destroyed in humanity. Hybridization threatened to erase the imago Dei by replacing the image of the Creator with the image of fallen beings. If the plan of the rebel angels had succeeded, there would have been no pure human left to bring forth the Messiah. From this perspective, the account of Genesis 6 becomes the essential prologue for understanding all of Scripture. It is the root that explains why the ancient world was saturated with idolatry, occultism, and superhuman-scale violence. The pagan gods that demanded blood sacrifices could be distorted echoes of these real historical beings. Mythology would not be pure fantasy, but rather the traumatic memory of humanity regarding real, catastrophic events. Zeus, Odin, and Marduk may stem from memories of the mighty primordial Nephilim leaders and other gods. The sagas of demigods like Hercules, Achilles, and Gilgamesh could be distorted memories of those hybrids that existed. The Epic of Gilgamesh describes a king who was over 5 meters tall and possessed superhuman strength from the gods. In Hindu texts, the Asuras are portrayed as giants who rose against the Devas in total cosmic wars. The Greek Titans who fought against the Olympians share unmistakable traits with the Nephilim from the Genesis account. Their sagas of incest, crime, and war reflect the chaos that Genesis describes with such brevity and striking sobriety. The Bible demystifies those beings by stripping them of their greatness and exposing them as sentenced cosmic criminals. Claiming those so-called gods are merely prisoners awaiting eternal judgment is a strong act of resistance. In reading these texts today, we confront the discomfort of a world much stranger than we usually admit. We favor a logical faith, yet the Bible shows a universe filled with hostile and intricate intelligences. The mystery of the sons of God compels us to rethink our place within a cosmic hierarchy that we do not perceive. It warns us that human history is not a closed system, but a stage exposed to influences from invisible worlds. The Scripture insists that the doors between dimensions have not always remained hermetically sealed and forever. And he warns that in the end times the world will be like the days of Noah, just before the great catastrophic judgment. This prophecy points to the return of the same dynamics of corruption that caused the ancient divine punishment. Today we observe how science dangerously experiments with genetics, crossing barriers between species in laboratories. The transhumanist agenda and artificial biological enhancement evoke the promises made by the foreign watchers. 21st century scientists openly discuss mixing human and animal DNA to create chimeras for medical purposes. CRISPR enables genetic editing of the human genome in ways previous generations couldn't have imagined. Big tech companies are investing billions in the pursuit of digital immortality and total mind-machine fusion. The promise is always the same: you will be like God, knowing and mastering the deep secrets of life and death. Presenting the desire to overcome natural biological limits as progress could be repeating the ancient fatal mistake. To long to be more than human and to reach the divine through technology is the same temptation as always, without disguise. Genesis 6 is not a literary fossil, but a dark mirror that reflects our unleashed current ambitions. It challenges us to ask whether we are repeating the same mistakes that led to the destruction of the first civilization. The current fascination with contacting non-human intelligences could be a modern version of that ancient, fatal mistake. Opening doors that we do not know how to close has always been the downfall of human curiosity devoid of moral limits. The story concludes with a warning echo that has resonated through the millennia to reach us today. The identity of the sons of God remains one of the most fascinating enigmas in all of sacred literature. Whether seen as angels, kings, or demons, their influence on humanity's collective consciousness is undeniable. They compel us to look up and ask ourselves what secrets are hidden in the depths of forgotten time. The truth about our origin is much more disturbing and extraordinary than any fiction we have imagined. In the end, Genesis leaves us with the certainty that we are not alone, but not all company is innocent or welcome. The veil between the natural and the supernatural is much more fragile than our modern reason would like to acknowledge now. Understanding this chapter is equivalent to possessing a master key to decipher the myths of all ancestral cultures. It is the missing piece that connects history, religion, and legend into a single coherent and deeply unsettling narrative. The divine beings that took on human form left a mark that even the flood could not completely erase. Her legacy endures in the megaliths and in the legends of giants that inhabit the folklore of every corner of the planet. Recognizing its historical existence is the first step to awakening from the dream of normality in which we are entrenched. The reality is much vaster, more dangerous, and more astonishing than what conventional history books have conveyed to us. This mystery, hidden beneath the sacred narrative, invites us to keep our eyes wide open to the inexplicable at all times. There are more secrets waiting to be revealed, truths that official history has preferred to bury for many centuries. If you want to explore more mysteries of the past that will transform your worldview, don't miss our upcoming videos. The story you were taught is just the surface of a much deeper and more disturbing reality than you can imagine.